Everyone, thank you so much for coming back and listening to our advice episode with Christine. Christine, thank you so much for coming back on, for sharing such a heartbreaking story about your son, Dominic. So, thank you so much again and for being with us today.
You so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Just for point of reference, can you tell us a little bit about your son and what happened to him, how old he was, and about how long ago it was that he was born?
Absolutely. My son Dominic was born July 2021. So, he was about 27 weeks when he was born. Obviously, he was stillborn. And we didn't really have many complications up until the very end. And I almost can't believe that it's been over 2 years. It feels like it just happened, but it's definitely been a journey and something that I will just cherish the time that I had with him. But yeah, it was definitely a very traumatizing experience. And but as time has gone on, I've been able to kind of see different perspectives and things. And but yeah, we miss him terribly for sure, even after these 2 years.
Yeah, it just doesn't ever leave you. It just never leaves you that grief and that kind of big old hole that's in your heart now, I think. So, okay, well, just to jump into it, because if you haven't had a chance to listen to Christine's birth story, I encourage it. There were kind of a lot of things that were driving me crazy, and I'm sure you will speak to this. So, can you, just before we get started though, I want to talk about, because you did say you can't believe it's been 2.5 years, but tell me how the grief was back then, maybe kind of shortly after it happened versus now when you have a little bit of time. How has that looked and changed for you?
Absolutely. So I think when it first happened, I think there was this tremendous amount of disbelief, just denial going on. I don't think I think it took me honestly quite a while to even come to the realization, especially because I spent about a week in the hospital afterwards. And that was just a constant reminder, but also there were kind of moments of just almost me forgetting my brain was almost trying to protect me from it. So it took me a while to even adjust my mindset to understand the immensity of what had happened. So I think for a while I was almost kind of numb. I really, when I first found out, when I was first told that he was no longer with us and I was still pregnant, I think at that point, I was very emotional. That was when the crying happened. That was when, just that pit feeling in your stomach. That's when that happened. But then as the days progressed, especially after he was born, and after, we had allowed the nurses to take him away, I think that was when my body just became numb, and I really didn't understand how I was going to address this mentally or emotionally. And then going home right after it happened, that was really demoralizing, and I think that's when it really sunk in. I didn't want to be at home. I think that was a big thing. I was afraid of being at my own home, which was really scary. And I cut out a lot of relationships. I feel like I really just did not want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to. The only thing I wanted to talk about if I talked to anyone was about Dom. I didn't want to talk about small talk. I didn't want to talk about distracting things. I really wanted to just keep the focus on him. And I think that that was really testing for some of my relationships, especially with friends, because it's an uncomfortable situation. People don't know how to develop, kind of have that mentality of what happened. And if you have never experienced it, you really don't understand what happened. So I felt really alone. I felt really ostracized from the people around me. And I feel like that was something that I did on my own. And I had terrible trouble with like sleep, and I thought about it all the time. It was the only thing that was really controlling my mind, and I had no I had no ambition to do anything. I really didn't care to. It was kind of a weird double-edged sword, because I didn't want to be at home, so I wanted to be busy, but at the same time I didn't want to do anything. So it was a weird balance between wanting to be distracted, but then also wanting to just basically just kind of morph into my couch and just not be present anywhere or any with anyone. Um, Kind of fast forward to 2.5 years later, our lives are very different now. So we do have two kids now, and I think that that has really kind of helped the healing process, but we still think about him every single day. And I think that the grief is very different. And if I looked at myself 2.5 years ago, I never would have thought that I would have gotten over this.
Yeah.
Because back then I really didn't care what happened to me. I didn't care about my life anymore. I really just became super depressed. And I really didn't see any end to the pain or the hurt. And I really didn't see anything positive. But people around me would have said that I handled it really well. But I think internally it was affecting me a lot harder than I think even some of the closest people to me would have recognized, because I just didn't, when I talked about Dom, I just wanted to talk about what happened to me and talk about him, but I wasn't ever really talking about my feelings. I wasn't ever really expressing where I was mentally. And looking at me now, I think I'm able to look at the good things. I'm able to, look at his picture and smile, which I never thought I would have been able to do. I look back on that time and I am still angry. I think there's still a part of me that's angry at people for I'll use the word neglect, but it wasn't obviously outright neglect, but I just kind of, I do still kind of have that resentment and that anger, but it's not a hateful anger. It's more of just a frustration. Because I do still kind of think about like when holidays come, we're in the holiday season right now.
Yeah.
And I think about, how would our lives look if Dom was alive? How would our lives be different? How would, he should be here. This should be his second Christmas. There's just so many things that kind of flood through your head. And it doesn't bring me sadness. It just is recognition now. But I never thought I would look at this positively. I never thought that I would be able to have pictures of him in my home. I never thought that I would be able to talk about him without, being severely depressed or getting very emotional. I didn't think that was going to be possible. And it is true, time does heal, but we're never fully whole. Like I'm not a whole person after that. Like there's definitely a part of me that died with him, which sounds sad, but when you're a mother or a parent in general, there's always that cliche saying you should never have to bury your children. And I think that having my first child pass away to no fault of my own, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I was told, that's a very challenging thing to live with every day, because there's always these what if things in your mind, and they're not necessarily negative. It's just, you never forget them. So there's two very different people, for me, like from the time that I was going through it right away to now, I'm a completely different person, but the grief is still there. And I don't think that'll ever go away at all.
Yeah, it kind of just changes a little bit in its how you interact with it and how you regard it, because like you said, you never thought you would be able to look at his picture and not be so, crying, sobbing. I would say I would feel the same. I felt the same way. It's just like I'm always going to be sad when I think about my son, and now it's a different. Yeah, I am a little. There's a tinge of sadness, and yes, the holidays are rough. Everybody, I hope everybody knows that it's going to be rough. Whatever the holiday is, whatever you guys celebrate, you always expect to be with family, and it's just tough. It's just so tough. Christine, I actually wanted to go back because you talked about how you were kind of in the depths of depression. I mean, you may have appeared a certain way, but I'm wondering if there was anything that was super helpful to kind of start digging yourself out of that. Because I mean, I want to give it all the possibilities that were helpful to you, and give people other tools that they can maybe explore if they are in that, because it is dark. And I mean, if you throw on top of that like maybe postpartum depression or anything like that, and then you throw the loss on, it's not good. It is not a great place to be. So tell me what worked, what helped, what did you try out that helped you kind of get to a little bit better place that you weren't maybe so numb.
So, as probably anyone's that's gone through this, there's always, and for any mother, you go through and you do that survey after you give birth with those questions and to measure postpartum depression. And my score was very high. So they had recommended in the hospital, which I kind of pushed to the side, about talking to someone, going to therapy.
Oh
And
yeah.
initially I didn't want to go to therapy. I didn't want to sit in a room and talk about, why I was feeling depressed, but I ended up going.
Mhm.
And I still go. And it's been 2.5 years and I still go to therapy. I don't go as often, but I still do. And I think that a lot of people kind of push off therapy. They're like, oh, I don't have a mental disorder, but it's not that. It was just having this unbiased person that had absolutely no ties to my situation, that wasn't going to interject an opinion, wasn't going to sit there and, try to make me see the positives, was going to allow me to be completely transparent, scream, cry, laugh, swear, do whatever I wanted to do in that 1 hour session. And I was going weekly. And sometimes I even went twice a week. It doesn't solve anything, there's nothing that's going to solve it, but being able to go into a space and just have such vulnerability to someone that is just going to be there to listen, that will not open their mouth unless you allow them the opportunity to. That was really helpful because it was basically a virtual punching bag for me. It was a way for me to indirectly yell at the doctors and kind of talk bad on them, and I don't like to be negative towards anyone, and I'm not disrespecting them, but my frustration was on them. It was towards them, and it
Completely.
was a space where I could just completely let out my anger and my frustration and my sadness. And honestly, I did feel when I would leave my sessions, for a temporary moment, I felt kind of like a lift. I felt a little lighter. I felt like, okay, that, I could take a deep breath and be like, that felt really good to get off my chest. Like that was just really kind of cleansing. And yeah, when I would get home, the emotions would flood back, but it was just a way for me to have a space every week where I could go and I could just say whatever was on my mind, whether it was about Dom or not. And I remember my first session going and I just sobbed for the first like 20 minutes of it, and I could barely get a word out. And my therapist just sat there. She let me have that time, and she said, when you're ready, you tell me why you're here, and and just tell me what is on your mind, what's bothering you. And as the sessions went on, I didn't cry as much. I was just more so being just kind of taking advantage of therapy and just venting. And that was really cleansing for me. That was something that was really helpful. And some people are a little biased about therapy. I never thought I would be someone to go to therapy. I just never thought about it, but it was really helpful. And I said this when we were talking originally. I have such a strong support system. My husband, my family. I mean, that goes such a long way. My dad, especially, he talks about Dom every single time I see him. And my dad was a therapist for years. So he's a great listening ear, for me. As my mom, my mom is my best friend. We talk about everything. So anytime I was feeling up to talking, I would call, and my mom and I would stay on the phone sometimes 2 or 3 hours, just me complaining and almost saying the same thing over and over again. But it was just because I needed that space and I needed that time. So for people out there that are going through this either now or unfortunately will go through it, if you have a great support system, that's a huge help, because those are the people that I could push away that would still be there. Like they understood if I was angry that I might be a little short or I might be rude or I might, and they gave me grace to say, okay, she just went through this. We're not going to try to fix her. We're just going to let her have her time and come to us when she's ready. And one of the things now is my parents, they live 30 minutes from us, so we see them all the time, but they have pictures of Dom in their house, and my dad talks about him constantly. Every time we're over there, my husband and my dad cheers to Dom every single time they have a drink together. And it's keeping Dom alive. And I think that, again, 2.5 years ago, I might have been like, I never want to do that. I want to be super avoidant. That helps me because it keeps Dom real. I never want to lose sight of, he is a part of this family, whether he's here or not. When people pass on, they don't stop being a part of the family. So that's been really helpful. And I feel for people who might not have that support system, because I don't know how I would have gotten through it. But I also think I journaled a lot. I did a lot of writing. And honestly, I did things like this. I listened to people talk about their stories. And honestly, I would hear stories, and I never like to say that someone's experience is worse than another, because losing a child, no matter what stage, is horrifying. but listening to other people's stories that might have gone through something very different than me, and maybe in some ways went through a little bit harder of a time than I did, that was really insightful, and it really helped me to gain a perspective of, because it was almost like this indirect support group. It was just a way for me to listen to people and to hear them, years down the line, and to see kind of that light at the end of the tunnel. Not that I saw it at the time, but it was just kind of, again, this cleansing way of hearing that I'm not alone. There are people out there that go through this, and unfortunately, like I mentioned before, this is voodoo. People don't talk about it enough. And until you go through it, you don't really know that it can happen. Um, so those were kind of the ways that I really just tried to, I wasn't outwardly saying like I need to take care of myself. It was just a way for me to kind of internalize everything, but also make sure that I was expressing things in a healthy way as opposed to being unhealthy. And I think that all of that together, it took a while, but I found those to be really, really benefiting for me at least.
Yeah. I can't stress enough, like, that is the like, so therapy is great. First of all, the first thing I was going to say, the space. Like, really, we kind of need just that space because you didn't have time to process what had just happened, right? I mean, you were in no state to, like you said, to even know what just happened. And so for you to be able to have a space where you could just take a little bit at a time, really, and just vent all the things, all the feelings, that is a huge benefit, I think, of therapy, is that there is just space. And one of the other things I want to point out for therapy is that you mentioned that it was unbiased. They're not going to interject their opinion. They're not going to do that toxic positivity type of a situation, because you're not going to, like, just pull yourselves up from the bootstraps and smile about the situation, because it sucks. That's all there is to it. It just sucks. So, like, yeah. So I appreciated when you said that. I just wanted to point that out, like, how good that was. And then the support system is huge, and like you said, there's so many people that don't have that. So I understand that can be rather difficult, and I'm hoping that people find comfort here like you have, and other places. There's so many people out there that are kind of talking about it a little bit more, which is awesome. So I just want to shout out all those other folks that are on Instagram or doing another podcast or whatever. We always want to just hold space that and just say that you're not alone, because that is so important, just to feel like, oh god, this does happen to a lot more people than I think. So, Christine, I do want to. So this is going to be obviously a little tricky, because there were some times, right? There were times when you felt like you were not given the best care possible, right? In a sense. Can you tell me how you went about trying to figure out that with your medical team, or that medical team that was taking care of you, taking care of Dom? And I don't want any, you don't really talk poorly of anybody, and we're not going to go there, but I'm just wondering how you can talk about what happened to you, and for those maybe going forward and or who are pregnant right now, like, what can they do in order to be an advocate for
Right.
yourself, your baby, and your health. So,
Right. Yeah. So I will start out by saying, first time pregnancy, you don't know what you don't know,
right.
which is exactly where I kind of fell. I trusted the medical team, and in no way do I think people shouldn't trust medical professionals. You absolutely should. But just to kind of summarize the backstory of what happened, I went in with these symptoms around 24-ish, 23-ish, somewhere in the early 20s weeks, and I expressed these concerns, and all of it led to preeclampsia. But they were telling me it was too early to develop, and that my levels weren't high enough, and that I was just under, the red flag mark of when they would do any additional testing. So I left there thinking, okay, you know, whatever. I should be fine. Nothing's wrong. All these things, and then, in turn, the result was losing our son. And there's a level of guilt that I hold, which I think any mother that has lost a child, no matter at what stage, feels some type of responsibility. What if I would have done this differently or whatever? And could I have advocated for myself more? I absolutely could have, but I didn't know any different. And I think Advocacy is the biggest piece of this. I think that every woman, every family, whether it's husband, support person, whoever it is,
Yeah.
needs to press people, because ultimately, if I go in for something, if I hurt a body part and I go in and I complain about something and the doctor tells me I'm fine, I'm not as concerned because it's just me.
Mhm.
But when you have an unborn child and you can't see anything, like the only thing you see is your growing stomach and the ultrasound. You don't see the insides of what's going on, and you can't actively observe it. You have to kind of just trust that your body is doing what it's supposed to be doing and that things are progressing. And for me, my advice to women, especially being pregnant, is that trust your mom gut, because it's a real thing. Mom gut is a real thing. If and I've learned that from this. I've learned this from being, finally being blessed to become a mom,
Mhm.
with my two babies. And I can tell you, mom gut is real. So even from the moment of conception, there's something in our brains that just switches, and we just become very self-aware of our children, and this mama bear mentality comes out. And I think at the time I felt that way, but I didn't know how to keep pressing without getting the same response. And I almost felt like I was bothering somebody. And that's my personality. I'm not aggressive. I'm not confrontational. So if someone tells me everything's fine, I'm going to go at face value.
Mhm.
Um, but I can just say, trust that instinct, because 9 times out of 10, we're right. If there is something that could be improved upon or something is wrong,
Yeah.
we can normally feel it already. And I knew something wasn't right. And if you feel like you're not getting the sufficient answer that, if you go to an appointment, they say, oh no, you're fine. Like this can be normal. Don't let anyone tell you that this can be normal, because I hate that word more than anything, because that is all I heard throughout this duration of my pregnancy was, yeah, but that can be normal because of these reasons, or that's normal because of this. And I can't stand that word, because the way that you go through pregnancy and I go through pregnancy is very different,
Yeah.
and it's not the same, and it's not normal. And I knew my normal. I knew what my normal levels were. I knew what was normal for me to feel and what wasn't, but I didn't push hard enough. And I just think that if someone's not giving you sufficient answers, or is saying, well, you're not flagging, or we would only do this if you were at this level, go talk to somebody else. Go see somebody else,
Yes.
because you're not just protecting you, you have to protect your child or your children, or whatever, and you can't let somebody else tell you what you're feeling or how your body is reacting to something. And there's no harm in going to somebody else and getting more testing or getting additional, insight, or being checked, and them saying, oh no, like it's okay, like get that confirmation. But press, like we're not a medical book, like I'm not
Yep.
a medical case study, like I am somebody that is a living being that had a son and wasn't listened to, point blank. And I trusted in that one person. I wish I would have gone somewhere else. I wish I would have pressed her. I wish I would have just insisted on getting more tests or being seen more often. And that didn't happen. So taking that responsibility and just trusting yourself, and even if it's just for confirmation that everything's fine,
Yeah.
that's no harm. That's what I did when I was pregnant the second time. I called my L&D all the time and went in for ultrasounds, because I was just anxious, and I refused to trust in just the medical professionals. I wanted that confirmation all the time, and it might have driven people nuts, but I went through a trauma, and that was how I dealt with it. And I was just experiencing so much anxiety because of that. And so that's my big takeaway from my experience, that I can hopefully help women to understand, is don't let someone tell you that your body is normal or that something is normal. If you feel some type of way about something, you need to press, you need to insist, you need to go somewhere else and get a second opinion, because ultimately you're not putting yourself in any good spot if you feel like something is wrong and you're not insistent, because unfortunately, could my situation have ended the same way even if I did press? Who knows? It very well could have. But that living with that kind of what if, I keep saying what if, but that what if this would have been different, that that hurts me, not enough to be like, sobbing or upset, but I still wish I would have heard somebody say to me when I was pregnant with Dom, no, go do this, because if you don't, this could potentially happen. Um, so that's honestly from a healthcare standpoint,
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest, I think that's the biggest piece. And that just doesn't go for pregnancy and stillbirth. That goes for everything.
Exactly. You got to be an advocate for yourself completely. And I wanted to say one thing that was really super interesting, and it was kind of an indirect thought. But you said this was not normal for me because her. Okay, so you guys, her blood pressure was generally like on the lower side, and then all of a sudden it went
For my entire life,
for your
for
her.
my entire life.
Yeah, exactly. So this was weird that it actually bumped up kind of a little bit higher, but it was still within kind of normal parameters, like you
Right.
mentioned. And so knowing yourself is super helpful. Like you kind of you indirectly kind of mentioned that, but you do need to know what your normal is, what does feel right. And you're right. I think mom gut, that mom instinct is so like, yeah, something is not quite right. And you can see that in
Mhm.
your kids too. And I'm going to be completely honest. I can tell when my kids are like, oh, they're going to throw up. I swear they're going to throw up. You just
Yeah.
kind of know because
Yeah.
you know something is not quite right. And so knowing what the baseline is super helpful. And then so that you can kind of pinpoint when things are not quite normal. Christine, thank you so much for like bringing that up. Is one of those things that since I work in healthcare, I always am trying to encourage people to be advocates for themselves and knowing what to look for and also the thing that I wanted to point out was that it is a little scary sometimes to be like if you want to ask for a second opinion, right? Because you're like, I'm kind of married to this OBGYN. I know that sounds funny, but like I've searched them out. It took forever to get onto their list and everything. Like you likely can just go to the ER, right? You can go to the women's health, like the triage desk that they have there also
Yeah.
just to get, like you said, kind of a second opinion. So just don't think that you don't have options. Um, yeah, like you want to take care of your baby as best as you can, and you as well, because like there's a chance. I mean, there was a very good chance that Christine could have also died. Like that's the other thing. Like she was in the hospital for a good chunk of time in order to for herself to recover. So yeah, so don't feel like you're married to your doctor sometimes. Like I think we have such like this I have a patient doctor relationship. I can't ask for a second opinion. Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Yes, absolutely. And at very least, you call the labor and delivery
Yep.
section, like a hospital at your local hospital, and you just say that you want to come in, and they will just tell you to come in. And that's what I wish I would have known. But at the time, again, I didn't know that that was a thing. I didn't know you could just walk in and get that help. But
Yes.
if there's nowhere else to go, or it's too overwhelming to find another doctor, just go to the hospital, and that's something that I learned over the course of this whole journey, is that that's an option.
Yeah. It's so yeah. So please just know that you have options out there. Don't just think that it's something that everything's going to be fine. So just yeah, advocate for yourself. Christine, I am wondering, I always like to ask how you as a couple handled the loss, just because I feel like this is such an important part where couples break up over it. Like it is
Yeah,
a lot of couples break up over it. So I am wondering if you can talk about how you guys handled that as a couple, because
absolutely.
I feel like that's such a it's a hard topic to broach sometimes because you're like, we're both crying about this same thing, but you're doing it so weird and different.
Oh my gosh. So it's actually funny that you bring up about, not funny, but the fact that you brought up about splitting up, because that's actually something that my parents and even some of our other family members have said, how amazed and proud and how incredible they think my husband and I are. My husband's name is Jack. And, they say to us, and they said to us, early on, how we were the complete opposite. We got closer.
Mm,
And I think with us, it was, my husband has experienced very close loss in his life in young adulthood. And I haven't as much. I've kind of had that typical, the grandparents pass away. And I've never really had someone unexpectedly pass away that wasn't supposed to.
right,
Growing up, that just wasn't something that I unfortunately didn't have to go through that.
right.
So my husband was a great support system for me. We do, as you mentioned, we handled it very differently, which I think is was healthy. I think if we both handled it the same, it might have been a little harder to support each other.
Mm.
But we were the complete opposite. We got closer, and it was almost like we had experienced this tremendous loss, so we almost held on to each other tighter. Like we were very protective of each other because now we were expecting to be a family of three. Now we unfortunately don't have our son, and it was just we became, not saying we'd never argued or had moments where we got mad at each other or frustrated in relationship to this, but it wasn't nearly what I have heard from other people and heard through the grapevine have affected relationships. And for us, it was more of, I was again the talker. I wanted to talk about Dom. I wanted to almost talk about him like he was still here, and kind of keep him alive, keep him in our home. And my biggest fear was that we were going to shut him out and try to eliminate this part of our lives. And while I did want to do that, I also didn't want to shut him out. So my husband was a little bit more, and I think if he were here, he would even say he was almost emotionless at some points.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at times that frustrated me because I was like, why are you sitting here and not upset and because he wasn't reacting the way that I wanted him to.
Yeah.
He internalizes a lot, and that's how he processes. I'm more emotional. I'm very external. So you can tell when I'm upset. With him, it's more, he's able to really compartmentalize and just keep it in. Sometimes I would see it come through, but it was very different. And I think for me, if he saw that I was having a bad day, he would try to distract me, get me out, make us go places, hang out with friends, like do something to get me, something to just distract me, however temporary it was going to be. So for us, our recovery period together as a couple was very different, than I've heard. And I think that it was because my husband just kept everything in.
Yeah.
And again, in the moment, like as I have changed over 2.5 years, my view of how we processed it has changed. Because back then I was almost even though we were closer, we weren't fighting, and there were times of frustration where I'm like, why aren't you crying? Why aren't you, talking about him? You never, like, anytime I bring him up, you don't want to talk. And now I realize, and I realized this, a while back, but looking back on how I was and how I thought back then, I'm like, I know why he was doing it, because he was trying to not only protect himself, but he was trying to protect me and trying to just help us not move on, but try to just continue to live. And I think that at the time I was very stuck in the present, and I didn't want to move past Dom, because I figured if we continue living I almost felt like living our lives was kind of unfair,
Yeah.
because I'm like, he didn't get to live his. So why
Yeah.
are we going about our day
Yeah.
acting like we wake up and it's fine and life goes on? For me, life wasn't going on. And I think for Jack, he was trying to get me to realize that while we can, yes, recognize what happened, and we can, obviously talk about him and remember him and keep him alive with us, we still need to move forward. We can't just sit and just go and agonize ourselves with talking about it constantly. And it was just, I had a very different mindset 2.5 years ago, but now I recognize that that was the healthiest way for us to go about it. And as the days progressed, days you would feel good and we would be great, and then the next day would be horrible, and it's not to be discouraging. It's just that we're humans, and some days are worse than others. But I think because he's gone through so much in his life, he was able to kind of be that protector for me, and he didn't break down, and he had his moments, but it was more by himself. Like he's kind of that person that just wants to think about things on his own and let time kind of work its way with him, as opposed to, like, he would never go to therapy, but I would. So we're very different in that way. So I think we balanced each other out, because I was kind of the outlet of emotion,
Yeah.
and he was really strong at receiving it while maintaining composure, which was really helpful for me.
Mhm.
Um, and now, 2.5 years later, we're able to talk about him, and we smile and laugh about him. And we talk to our kids, and, we bring Dom's name up, and we have a picture of Dom in their room. So the way of our lives just is completely changed. And I think that, again, the support system, he's very supportive. And I think just because of how we handle things and we were so polar opposite, I think it almost was the best way
Yeah.
for us to stay together as a couple.
It seems super
But
respectful
yeah,
too. Like he was super respectful of how you were processing it, and and it's so easy just to kind of be reactive to like him not acting a certain way. Because I would same thing with my husband. Totally got frustrated at times when I'm like, "Why are you not bawling?" Um,
right, right.
but I appreciate the way that Lee expresses his grief, and it looks way different. And but that's just the way it is. It's going to be different. It's going to change the way you guys, as you start processing things and how that looks. So yeah, I congratulate you for getting closer together, because that is so hard. It really is kind of a miracle sometimes when couples
Yeah.
stay together after such a huge loss, huge trauma in your life. So
And I would encourage people, honestly, like, and it's hard in the moment. I know that. And this is actually something that my therapist and I talked about,
yeah,
is to actually sit down and talk with each other and understand where you are in grief, and what is, like, how I can help you, instead of, because I would tell her, I'm frustrated that he's not upset. And
right.
my therapist was like, well, he's probably really upset. It's just he's dealing with it a lot differently than you are. So, there were times that Jack and I would sit down and I would say, what can I do to, like, help you? Or where are you in the grieving process? Or how are you processing this? And, like, understanding how each other processes it, I think, is super helpful, because we can sit here all day and perceive things about each other, but until you really kind of talk about it, I think that was really helpful too. So not being afraid to say, hey, this is how I'm going to grieve,
Right.
and this is what I need from you. And then allowing the person to say what they need and how they want to grieve through it. And that grieving can change over the course of time. And it obviously has. So I think just not getting frustrated, trying to eliminate the frustration with one another is definitely key, and just trying to understand how this person's dealing with it, because it's a traumatic thing, and people don't react to trauma the same way. So I think that just that talking is really, really important, because some people can just shut each other out. And I think that's when people split up, is when they don't openly talk.
Yeah, acknowledge how they are dealing with it. It's funny because when you said sit down and like kind of show your cards, because like you said, your husband Jack was he had some trauma, and so he has gone through that. He knows how he's done it in the past and what worked for him to get through that. And but you hadn't. And so it's interesting, just like, oh yeah, he's got a worn set of cards that he's very familiar
Yeah.
with, and you had a new set of cards that you're like, okay, this is what I'm dealing with.
Right.
And how we can help each other like get through it together. That was just a cool like visual when you said that, like sit down, get together, talk about words.
Yeah.
So I love this section because I think it's kind of funny actually. So what are some things, first of all, that helps you, that you feel like that other people did for you, that they said and that they did, that you shout out, give them a thanks on air? But is there anything that kind of stuck out to you that was exceptional, that really helped you through this grieving process, and from the very beginning to even now?
Yeah, I would say the first person that I would give a shout out to is actually my dad, because, and it wasn't even related to Dom passing, but my dad, um, and we even have a sign in our house above one of our doors. And my dad always says, all things pass. He said that to me since I was a little girl. Just when things seem so insurmountable and you feel like you can't get through it, which at the time, that was a breakup or, something silly. And now that phrase, even though some days I didn't feel like I would ever move past this, has always really stuck with me. And I think just reminding yourself of that, and just reminding yourself of, hey, this does, as you said, this sucks, this is horrible. And I don't want to forget it. I don't want to move on, and whatever, but all things do pass. 2.5 years later, I can sit and for the most part openly talk about Dominic and my experience and not be super sad. Obviously it's sad, but I'm not sitting here sobbing. I'm here and I'm talking about him, and there are positives and there's negatives. So I would definitely say that that's number one. Honestly, I feel like for me personally, I think it's just now, I think one of the biggest things is just the celebration that we still have for Dom. I think my husband,
Yeah.
my parents, especially even my husband's mom and stepdad, I think just the celebration and recognition of Dom, and we don't talk about him like he's an afterthought. He's actively in our lives still, and I think that really, without overdoing it, because I do think there's a limit. I think if you're going too much into it, you're still kind of living in that time.
Yeah.
But just acknowledging him and talking about him and even talking to him, and talking, and when our kids are growing up, like saying this is your brother, we say that now, and just we don't do it to because we're sad. We do it because he's part of us, as this podcast literally clearly
Mhm.
says. He's still a part of us. And I think that that is so helpful. And it might feel, because again, when I was first going through this, I didn't think that I would ever want to talk about him, years after, because it was just too painful. But time goes to show that regardless of how, what you went through, how it happened, they're still a part of your family. They're still with you in some way. And keeping that alive. I don't even like to say memory. I like to just say keeping them alive in your lives. I think I give a shout out to our entire like immediate family, because we still talk about him
Yeah.
and we still cheers for him. We still have pictures of him. We still talk to the kids about him. So it's just, there's so many things that, we could have done just trying to eliminate that part of our lives. And I think that keeping them alive is healthy. I think that that is part of the process, is coming to the realization that, okay, they're not physically here, but that doesn't mean that they're not here, So that's been a huge, huge help. And I think just changed my mentality from this is horrific, this is horrible, how could this happen, to coming to terms, like that typical steps of grief, accepting. I've accepted it now. Am I, happy with the result? No, but I've accepted it and I am doing what I can to keep him in our lives. And I think that again, having a strong support system is key, but making sure to not just be an advocate for yourself during the times that you're going through these, the pregnancy or the struggle with whatever, but also advocating for your child when they are not physically here, like saying, reminding people of them, talking about them, and that kind of thing. I think that that really is important. And it's recognizing that they do exist and that you did go through this, because I don't think anybody could ever say they forget a trauma, so turning the trauma into a positive years later, I think is something that no one foresees and no one thinks is ever going to happen. But I'm here to tell you it happened. It's just making sure that you give yourself grace for sure, which is just another part of it. Like give yourself grace. Don't feel like you have to get over this in a week, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
This is a long process.
Yes, yes. I love that. It's just it's a daily like giving yourself grace, and cuz it's so frustrating cuz you're like I should be over this by now. And people have said that kind of thing like aren't you okay now? No, no, no. Like no. Just give yourself time. Oh, that's so good. It's so
And I
so
think if
helpful.
people ask me that now, are you okay with it? I would be like, no, I'm not okay. Like, because like I said earlier, a part of us died with him. And I think that if that's true, then I'm never okay. It's
Right.
just I've accepted that it happened. And unfortunately life does go on, and we do live our lives, and that's fine, but you're never okay, but you're able to accept it and you're able to acknowledge it, and you can get through it. It's important to recognize that every single day is different.
Yeah. It totally is. And like you said, giving yourself a little bit of a break and giving yourself a little bit of grace and realizing I love to think of this anyway with my son is that I didn't leave him behind. Like he's not like we're not in a little chronological like timeline here or anything like that. He's come along with us. He's part of our family. He is part of our existence, like who we are as a family, like a big and I we're just taking him with us. Like that's all there's to it. And I think some people think that we're leaving him behind. And so I like that. I love that your family also talks about you, Dom, just the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are some things that were not super helpful? Things that set people said or did that maybe would be less recommended to do. And yeah, I
Yeah,
would say
I think, and you've probably heard some of these phrases or things. I would think so. The biggest one that sticks out in my head is when someone said that, well, at least he wasn't, fully developed yet. And I think that really stung. And, because we have his footprints, we have his handprints, we have pictures, we held him. He was a full baby. He was just tiny.
yeah.
And, he was 1 pound, 14 ounces. So he was tiny, but he had all 10 fingers, 10 toes. He had his eyes, his nose, his mouth. He was perfect. He was a perfect little baby. So that's not helpful. So,
Not helpful at all.
and the thing that I will say with comments like that is don't be afraid to speak up. Don't sit there and keep quiet. Say something, respectfully, but be like, no, like
Yeah.
that's not true.
Yep.
Because the people that say things like that, they don't mean anything by it. They're trying to be like helpful,
Mhm.
but they don't understand it. They don't understand how things progress. They don't understand. They've never gone through it. They've definitely never gone through it if they say something like that. Um, you just for me, and this is really hard because I did not like when people would ask me how I was doing. I thought that was such a dumb question. This is like immediately following. So this is like I'm out of the hospital. And I know it's hard to check in on somebody without asking that, but I think there's a way to go about it where it's,
Mhm.
hey, I just wanted to check in. Is there anything you need? Things like that. Asking me how I was doing or if I was feeling okay. I'm like, that just seems redundant to me. And at the time I was like, why would you ask me that? Like what? And I did get snippy with some people and I was like, well, no, I'm not okay. My son just died and
Yes.
am home from the hospital and no, I'm not okay. It just sounded like a dumb question.
Yeah.
So that wasn't helpful. And again, like you can't really tell people, hey, don't ask me this. But I just think unless you've gone through it, I might have asked someone the same thing. I might have said to somebody, if I never went through this, are you doing okay? And you're like, no.
I'm doing
So
terribly.
I think that was not helpful because again, it just kind of reminded me of I have something to be sad about. I have a reason to not be okay. And then I think just people that people that when I tried to talk about my son that tried to change the subject. I think that was really disheartening
Yeah.
because it was, I went through this trauma. I'm trying to just cope with it. I'm trying to move past it, but you don't go through a trauma. Well, at least some people do go through a trauma and shut down, which is fine. And they don't want to talk about it. I'm the opposite. Like I said over and over, I'm an emotional, I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I like to talk about things when they bother me. And when people would act uncomfortable or change the subject,
Mm.
that was hurtful because it was like, why can't I talk about my son? Why are you diverting away from him? It was almost that mama bear mentality that was like, no, we're going to talk about my son and that's what we're going to do. And it almost felt like they were, kind of like, well, he's not alive. So why do we need to talk about this kind of
Right.
thing? And as a mom and as a parent, your kids are all you want to talk about, whether they're here or not. They're your whole reason for existing. That's why we're here. We're here to be parents, and that's our first job title. And just because my son passed away doesn't make me any less of a mother. And I think that wanting to talk about him and wanting to talk about my story and talk about what not only I went through, but just to even talk about like what Dom looked like or how big he was, or just like trying to almost talk about the good things. It felt like I was being robbed of that ability to talk about him because I was making other people uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
I think allowing people that are going through this to have the room to talk about it, even if it makes you uncomfortable, they need that, especially if you're close to them. That's what we need. We need that. We need that space. And I think that was really disheartening sometimes when people would seem like they wanted to just kind of push that off to the side and not talk about it.
Yeah. Once again, that space is so important. And you know what? Honestly, like as uncomfortable as it is, it will feel because there are times when it's just like, oh, this is gonna be hard. This is gonna be rough. You guys will be you will be closer because of it. They will be a person that will be able to like hold space for you when it's not the prettiest or it's
Yeah.
just uncomfortable. So I just think that on the other side of that discomfort there's going to be a stronger relationship, and why not give that a try? I think that yeah, changing the subject is not great. That is not great.
No, it's not helpful. And it is kind of discouraging because again, like, when you do have a baby and the baby is okay and everything's great, people want to hear about it,
Exactly.
and
They want to hear the
so
entire birth story and you're like, "Oh, okay, I can't."
right. But then you're a mom who goes through this and you're robbed of that. Even though it's not a happy story or a happy ending,
Yes.
you feel like you have no outlet. And that can be really, really hard.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that I think just allowing, kind of putting your uncomfortable feelings to the side and just allowing that person to have that time, especially when it just happened. Because when it just happens, if I went to my friends and started talking about it now, they would listen, but it's not real in real time happening right now that I'm going through. It's more of just a recanter of what happened.
Right.
But yeah, I think that was not always, and I had a lot of people that were very supportive and let me talk their ears off about it, but there were some that I could just, when we were sitting, they were just not really having any input. They weren't really reactive. They were just kind of trying to, move on to a different thing. And that was more hurtful than anything. I don't think it was, like unhelpful. I think it was just hurtful because it just felt like I couldn't talk about him. And to me, that was almost an insult to him. Um, so that was definitely something that sticks out from
Yeah.
from when it first happened.
Yeah. It really does. Oh, it's so that first little bit is so, so hard. And to have that, the people that will let you talk their ear off is so
Yeah.
precious, actually. Christine, I wanted to ask you this question. So can you fill in the blank? And especially
Yes.
since you've had some time out, grief is like blank.
Ooh, that's a big question. Grief is, I'm going to say it's like ocean waves. I feel like for me, I would get flooded with just emotions out of nowhere. I mean, at first it was constant, just like when you get caught in a wave
Yep.
and you're swimming in the ocean and you keep getting knocked over, knocked over, knocked over, you can't catch your breath. That's how it started. And then as the months progressed, then it was more of I would get hit with a wave and then it would flood back out. And then I would be okay for a little bit. And it was kind of calm water. And I felt like I was getting somewhere and I could just relax. And then out of nowhere, another, would come. And I think now I'm kind of in the calm water phase. I'm going through it and it's still there, but I'm not getting hit.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely something that I think it should be a positive, kind of forward thinking, which I know when you're in the moment, it's impossible to forward think. So that is, I know, not really an option for people going through it right now. But that whole cliche, if it does get better, that's what I think the waves are. It feels so pounding and just completely, traumatizing. And then there's further and further waves that hit me. And then I was able to just take a breath and come up for air and realize like, I'm here, everything's okay. I can do this. I can live with this grief. I can carry it with me. And I'm an ocean lover, so that's where my mind goes.
Yeah.
But I do think that is really good depiction of how I processed it and kind of where I started versus where I am now.
Yeah, that is like a beautiful image of because it's so interesting. Also, the calm waters. You're like, I'm still in the waters, like still there. It's just not hitting me and pummeling me basically
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
single day. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's beautiful. Christine, thank you so much for your time today. I really have appreciated our discussions that we've had, and being able to honor Dom and be able to tell his story and get all the details about him. I just wanted to close and see if there was any last little bit of advice that you wanted to share with us, or anything you want to say about Dom.
Yeah, no, I think this has been something that I've wanted to do for a while, and I really appreciate being able to share Dom's story. I think this is just another way for me to just in a different way talk about him and just let those feelings out, but in a way that can hopefully help some women and families going through it. I will say I encourage women to do something like this or find a forum that they can have an open discussion, because it is so cleansing, but it also helps to just keep the memory alive. I think that, not all of us can be on a podcast, but I think that it's just so nice to have this kind of platform. But yeah, I mean, in closing, I would say that, if I got through it, it's possible, and it's going to be hard. It's not easy. And I don't think any mother would tell you that it happens overnight. It doesn't. But 2.5 years later, I can sit here and talk about my son and live a life with him still in it. And if anything, I hope that that's encouraging.
Thank you, Christine. That was perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Winter. I appreciate it.